Many know about slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a native Black American and a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, go to nativeblackancestry.com to schedule a consultation.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them, and this shit get way deeper than your pigment.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, smash that like button on the way in. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Make sure to check out the website nativeblackancestry.com if you need assistance with genealogy research. And I have just launched my book, Reclassified, 5 Centuries of Paper Genocide. You guys can cop that over at the website, nativeblackancestry.com. But guys, let's go ahead and get straight on into it. We've got our guest, Travis, back again from the YouTube channel, Handsome History. And he's going to break down some very interesting treaties and, highly overlooked parts of colonial history here in North America. But without further ado, let's bring Travis up. How you doing, Travis? Thanks for joining us again.
Hello. Good to be here. That's for sure. 1 second here. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up here.
Oh no, you're fine. Take your time. Take your time. But yeah, guys, you guys can find Travis over on his YouTube channel, Handsome History. He also just launched a website, AmericanAncestryDecoded.com. So make sure to go check him out over there. But go ahead and give us a little preview, Travis. What are we going to be getting into? I know that this is heavily going to be based on, racial reclassification, paper genocide, but more specifically, there's a treaty that I've never heard of. What's this treaty again?
Yeah, sorry. Let me yes, it's the treaty area. The Puritan. We're going to discuss is the 1646 Treaty of Middle Plantation. That's in Virginia. And I'm calling this the Puritan ritual of paper genocide. That's right. There's a whole ritual to it.
Come on. So all these folks want to say Black Americans are wobbles and pretendians and they're not indigenous. And here we are about to use their own history against them because they created a whole treaty that was predicated on racially reclassifying indigenous people. But hey, I don't want to steal your thunder, Travis. Go ahead and hop right on into it. You have the floor.
Okay. Here we go. All right. Yes. So let's get started. Today, I'm going to walk you through one of the coldest, most calculated pieces of legal engineering in early America, the 1646 Treaty of Middle Plantation. If you want to understand how indigenous nations in the East were stripped, not only of land, but of identity itself, this is a pivot point. This is where the English convert a war into a trust document, a people into wards, and a civilization into a legal fiction. This is the ritual moment, the Puritan ritual paper genocide, where the accounting ledger replaces the chief and the treaty becomes a weapon. Let's talk about it. The collapse of Opekanov's world. By 1646, Opechancanough, the last great Powhatan strategist, has been hunted down. 1646, hunted down. His resistance collapses. The English parade him as a trophy through Jamestown. A soldier shoots him in the back. That single act is the symbolic beheading of the Powhatan sovereignty. For more than 20 years before this, English settlers had already been assassinating the Powhatan leadership class, chiefs, diplomats, intermediaries, exactly as described in the Genesis of the United States. Here, they eliminate the leadership first. They sever the chain of the title. They sever it. Then they begin to impose a new legal structure. This is how these gigantic trust seizures work. They remove the ancient trustees. They seize their ledger, their way of recording things, and they impose a new jurisdiction, a new way of recording things, a new set of trustees. So his death isn't just the end of the war. It's the beginning of a new civilization, a new regime. The 1646 Treaty of Middle Plantation, let's look at the core clauses. Now, the English sit down with Nakotawans, who was the successor. And they present Nakotawans with what they call articles of peace. These aren't peace terms. They're actually incorporation terms. Think about this for a second. Like a corporate acquisition of another corporation, buying another business. They're the merger documents for the takeover of the entire Powhatan nation. Let's break it down. First, you have acknowledgement of English sovereignty. Nakatawans and his people must, I quote, acknowledge themselves tributaries to the crown. That's right, 1646. This goes back to people, okay, Northern Virginia tribes at this point having to acknowledge themselves tributaries to the English crown. That phrase is the death sentence for sovereignty. Once they became a tributary, they're no longer a nation. You're now a tenant. Then there's the annual tribute, beaver skins, arrows, whatever else the English were going to demand. The tribute is the symbol of permanent subordination, a rent payment straight into the crown's trust. This annual tribute still goes on today. Boundary and reservation clauses. For the first time, the English draw hard borders. The Powhatan people are confined north of the York River. If they cross that river without permission, they can be shot on sight. How about that peace treaty? This is the birth of the reservation logic, containment as governance. Military policing. They now incorporate a pass system. It appears here. That's right. Passports forced upon the Powhatan, 1646. Without a pass, you are a target. Then there was missionary oversight. The Englishmen are appointed to, I quote, teach them the knowledge of God. This isn't a religious outreach. It's identity restructuring. Conversion is classification, right? So part of the treaty is the parents are going to have to give their children up to be missionized, to be converted. It's all part of what I call that hostage system, especially for the elite. They take them in age 7, they keep them till they're 21, and they graduate with all the rights of English citizens, and they try to use them on their behalf of the empire to help them missionize and survey and actually work against the interests of their own tribe. All right. Number 6, crown protection, the wardship trap. This is the most important part. Once the Powhatans are called subjects and tributes, they fall under English wardship. And wards cannot hold land. They cannot sue independently. They cannot dispute their trustee. In other words, their overlord. Their identity is no longer theirs. So this begins as early as 1646. Their identity was no longer theirs. How is this jurisdiction installed? This ritual reading. That's right. They literally go through the ritual reading these certain words, just like saying mass. Colonial minutes actually describe the moment. I quote, the articles were read and interpreted before the assembled chieftains, whereupon the governor demanded their assent. This is all theater. The English perform the sovereignty. The chiefs perform consent or are recorded as having done so. This performance becomes the very legal foundation of every land property title in Tidewater, Virginia. So basically it's like this: reading plus interpretation plus the exchange of tokens and gifts equals jurisdiction transfer. You're no longer in control of your identity. You're no longer an independent nation. So this is the Puritan version of like covenant ceremony. The covenant is designed to erase the people. Isn't that interesting? They weren't killing off the tribe. They were changing their identity and removing their authority of their elders. Middle Plantation then becomes a new corporate office. Middle Plantation is a place where the treaty is signed. And guess what it is now? It is Williamsburg. That's right, colonial Williamsburg. All right. This place becomes a distribution point for land patents. It becomes a geographic vault for the new trust regime. In other words, Middle Plantation, what is now known as colonial Williamsburg, this wonderful patriotic tourist attraction, was where they basically allocated all the land after they displaced Indians around Virginia. Is basically where they manage all the titles. And in 1677, after Bacon's rebellion, the English used this same Williamsburg site in almost the same language to do what? Renew the submission ritual. Now, you must ask yourself why they had to do it in 1677 again after Bacon's Rebellion. That tells you something about exactly what type of people were involved in Bacon's Rebellion. How the 1646 treaty became the blueprint for paper genocide, identity erasure, and quiet title theft. It's all kind of tied together, right? Erase your identity. Now I didn't do anything illegal by taking your property. Kind of interesting. The treaty does not just seize land, it seizes identity. It rewrites who the Powhatans are allowed to be. The English knew the formula. You can't steal land permanently unless you destroy the legal identity of the owners. Let's walk through the mechanism. So it's not necessarily you destroy the owners physically, but you do destroy the legal identity. You reduce the power that they once had. Here's the mechanism. Step one, turning nations into subjects. Once you're a subject, you have no independent diplomacy. You have no standing as a nation. And without nationhood, you have no sovereign title. That's the legal pivot that later becomes domestic dependent nations. That's right. That's what the tribes are labeled as, right? Domestic dependent nations. The seed is planted way back in 1646. Step two, wardship. You create a legal cage around the Indians. Under wardship, land rights become use rights only. Remember, I talked earlier under your civilization, right? They had use rights for all the different members of these different clans, right? But here, these guys take the same idea and spin it onto the Indians and say, you guys have use rights, but only of this narrow area of land. Same wording, different intent, right? Also, under wardship, boundaries can be written at will, right? So they're going to survey everything and change up how land and property is divided. Third, tribal governments just becomes advisory. You have no real power. So this is why the reservation edges would shrink. Listen now, every generation after you set this up in 1646 and you reinvigorate in 1677, the reservation size, the edges shrink every generation. As the trustees control the map, they make it harder and harder to live the old ways. They make it more and more enticing to just convert and join the new system. People don't even want to be on the reservation. They're actually willingly transferring and joining into the colonial system. That's actually the origin of the word Yankees. Yankees were Indians that had sided with the foreigners. They were traitors. We'll do that another time. All right. Then you have confinement, reclassification, and then you have disappearance on paper. Here's the playbook, right? Confine the people on the reservation. You record only those who comply with the terms. You redefine Indian as a subject category. You erase those who don't fit the new category. You declare the tribe extinct, right? How many times you're reading a book or I'm listening to a video, oh, the Arawaks did this and they fought this, and then they became extinct. And it's like, that's it. So yeah, it's literally, we'll just declare them extinct. And in our official government documents, we refuse to acknowledge them as a tribe. Even to this day, right, you have two types of tribes, I believe, or two forms. You have recognition, and I believe that the other is like you're acknowledged, right? So I know there's many acknowledged tribes, so to speak, but they're not recognized. There's no type of like respect or relationship with this United States government. All right. So we just pretend you don't exist. Number 4, missionary conversion as identity strip mining, right? Conversion means you get the new name, new kinship structures. Guys, this is really huge. There's a big difference in civilization between the indigenous civilization of clan and extended family structures, right? And being part of that, which is very much like what you hear about feudalism and pre-capitalism in Europe as well, the clan-based structures. They changed that focus on what we now call the nuclear family, right? The mom and dad and the kids, and everybody's dependent on that, and that's the tax paying unit, right? And then finally, conversion means new legal categories, right? You might be labeled Negro, you might be a free person of color, you might even be white, depending on if you converted Christian into the religion as well. Typically, you converted on just the whole system, like monogamy, everything. A lot of times you'd be labeled white until the 1800s. So there's a whole thing to that as well. But regardless, the identity is getting ebbed and chiseled away at. And imagine maybe by the second generation, like 40 years after the parents kind of convert, have to kind of go with this flow, right? This path of least resistance. Who would really, what you really think the grandkid's gonna be? He's gonna be an Englishman at that point. And there's a whole story to that too. So once they're renamed and they go through the system, here's the genius of the system that people don't realize. After they come through at 18 or 21, they had the rights of Englishmen as long as they were in America. So they can go over to Europe and be treated like an Englishman, but as long as they stayed here, they were making them basically English citizens. So that's also how census rolls increased in a county and in a village. Literally, the mass conversion of Indians. They were called praying villages in New England. So now you have that identity getting lost, which means inheritance is getting lost, which means control and ties to the land are getting lost, right? So free people of color, mulatto, all of those, right? They're all trying to create that gap, that connection to the land, to where you really came from. So the idea is that the descendants will lose standing to claim the land. It's really actually ancient times, and it's a real thing called the law of the land. So the idea is that as you lose a sense of your identity and where you come from, you'll lose the standing to even try to claim the land. It's not because the actual DNA and the bloodlines disappears, because the category disappears. You're no longer a nation, right? So it isn't just a tragedy. It's actually a technology. It's a process. It's a technique. These guys are clever. Okay. And the treaty is the foundation of quiet title theft. From the 1600s all the way through Jim Crow era, courts will repeatedly rule like this. Quote, I quote, the tribes no longer exist. I quote, no recognized descendants remain. Interesting. No recognized, right? Kind of like being a recognized tribe. I quote, the line is broken. Imagine that in a court ruling, the judge just saying to the black American trying to recoup, so the line is broken. What does that mean? Right? These rulings like this go all the way back to the 1646 treaty. Remove the sovereignty, the idea of being a part of a nation, a separate nation with your own rules and economy and way of doing things, and basically creating that wardship dependence through religious indoctrination of each generation, and through the threat and use of violence. So the 1646 Treaty of Middle Plantation, it's not just this boring historical document that they'll probably glorify if you go do the tourist visit to Williamsburg. It's actually the operating system that the English or the Europeans were installing into North America. One designed to control the land by what? Controlling identity. This idea, this operating system was engineered to make a people disappear without killing them outright. And for many listeners, what I'm talking about isn't abstract history. I'm actually talking about a roadmap to reverse engineer your true heritage. If your family comes out of Virginia, the Carolinas, Tidewater Corridor, your people ever classified colored Negro, maybe you simply disappeared from the record before 1800, then you may be looking at the downstream effects of this exact treaty. Your ancestors may have been a part of these Virginian nations, reclassified, absorbed, but not actually erased, not truly banished. It's just the paperwork that made you disappear. This is where genealogy actually becomes resistance. This is where recovering your true identity becomes an act of restoration, reversing the very mechanisms that were designed to sever you from land, lineage, and memory. Truly, remembrance conquers oblivion. There you go. Thank you.
Ooh, round of applause on that. That was cold. Okay, that was cold. He took us there, yo. He took us all the way. Yeah, no, that is a lot of history that the average person is never going to hear. Even someone who goes to Ivy League school to become a historian, that's not going to be a part of the curriculum that they need to get their degree certification. That is how they perpetuate this paper genocide. I mean, a lot of the times you don't have to lie about history or, twist history. You just have to not talk about it. Just talk about certain parts, pretend like the rest never happened, and now we have the situation that we're faced with today, right?
Right. I mean, a lot of it is right. Pretend it didn't happen, and everything like that. And again, it gets back to 1646. That's a long time ago. So just by the time you get to 1800, it's been three
Come
generations.
on.
By the time, yeah, I mean, so you know, eh, they're Americans, and that's what they got to be thinking of themselves, because that's what you got to do to make a living, right? So
The
the whole thing is.
average, not even just the average white American, but just the average American who was not a native Black American, the average just American, um, no matter what country they originally migrated from, but the average American can most likely not trace their roots to the Americas to the 1600s. Yet, the average native Black American not only can, but we have paper trail evidence that we've been racially reclassified since the 1600s. I mean, this is just so deep how most people don't understand that by the time we get to the 1900s and civil rights and African Methodist Episcopal and the Boule trying to classify us as African American. I mean, these are people who've been converted, subjugated, co-opted for generations. Generations.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely what my research shows me. And it's interesting. It's the same approach used by this same sort of cabal, these kind of European trusts. They did it over in the Middle East, and they did it over in what became India. It's the common thing. You take the elite's children hostage. You do this whole indoctrination process for their entire youth, and they spit them out, and they redeploy them on behalf of these corporate trusts, of these, which become these empires, right? And it works. And think about it today. You can look at, I think it's England or Great Britain right now. Its prime minister is a very dark skinned, melanated man. He's not an Anglo, or okay. He is a descendant of a hostage elite, uh, Indian of India. Okay, you see what I'm getting at. So if you just look, you can see it even today from doing the same thing in other parts of the world.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Southern Breeze says, "What's the difference in definition of the term indigenous and native, please?" Nowadays, a lot of people try to use it interchangeably as far as political
Right.
status, but verbatim, I mean, indigenous would mean you're from the lands from the beginning of time, time immemorial, whereas native really just means you're born in that land. So, technically speaking, a lot of white Americans, Mexican Americans, Spanish Americans, I mean, a lot of these people could claim to be Native Americans if they're just born here, but to be indigenous to a place means that you don't descend from people who migrated here from another land. Hopefully that answers your question. But again, as far
That's
as
actually
political
good.
status, it's used interchangeably a lot nowadays. Native,
Right.
indigenous, aboriginal, First Peoples, First Nation, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Mhm. A shout out to Chris. Chris says, "My great grandmother was labeled as colored on the census." Yeah, exactly. She wasn't labeled as African. She was labeled as colored. Hmm.
Truly. Truly.
I mean, guys, if we
That's
come from
true.
West African slaves, guess what? It's so easy. Guess what? This is how you would know that it was true. When we do our genealogy,
Mhm.
when we trace it back through the centuries, our ancestors would have been called Africans, and they would have been written down as Africans, and they would have never been called anything other than Africans. But if our ancestors were, in fact, the indigenous people, descendants of pyramid and mound builders and vast civilization, then guess what you'd have to do? You'd have to reclassify them from indigenous or native to Negro, colored, mulatto, octoroon, freedmen, free man, the black, African American. You would have to play hot potato with the racial reclassification every 50 or 100 years if you're trying to hide the truth about who they are. Whereas if we come from Africa, guess what? They would have just called us Africans. Oh, and guess what? When they did so many like schemes and stuff to convince our ancestors to quote unquote go back to Africa, guess what? Our ancestors would have been dying to go back there. If that was our motherland, we would have been doing everything we could to go back to the motherland. But if that's a foreign land to us, then we would have no motivation to leave our true motherland right here. Right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of okay. So the first thing is they could have just bought all the slave contracts out, right? And then said, and then also spent money to ship everybody back to Africa. It would have been the simplest thing. The British actually did that in different cases, and not ship everybody back to Africa, but they just did a buyout. They just bought out all the owners of slaves. It's this whole thing. New England did it when they over time eliminated slavery. When you look at the legislation, the legislation was a buyout of the existing. It was manumission contract buying out the remaining slave contracts and then requiring the owners to take care of them, the elderly ones, and that was kind of the way they phased it out. So then it's like, so if these guys are from Africa down here, then like, why are we going through all this war? Like, why are we going through all this? Like, there's a whole simpler way to have handled it. There's just some Africans from the jungle that have no tie to the land. There's a way simpler way to have handled it.
Furthermore, if we were really Africans like that, then they would have just like rounded us up and deported us. Like, why is it that they needed our permission? Why is it that the first time a United States president ever invited black folks to the White House is when Abraham Lincoln invited prominent free men of color to the White House to try to convince their constituents to voluntarily migrate, not even to Africa, but just any other country or island away from North America, right? I mean, why did they need us to voluntarily deport or colonize another place if we're really just descendants of some African slaves and we don't own nothing and we ain't got nothing? I mean, round us up on a boat and send us over to Ghana or something, right? I mean,
right.
But but if we descend from American Indian families who still have land patents and deeds, and some of us had descend from hostage and converted indigenous bloodlines that have been playing this English colonial game for generations and actually have rights, well then guess what? These free men can't just be rounded up like some slaves and deported.
Well, that's why they had, the Freedmen's Bank. Like, so why would you even bother with that if you guys are all Africans? Like, how did that even work? I mean, they ended up using it in a way to abscond. But the whole point is like, yeah, like, what's going on here? Like,
hold on. There's so much similarity. They basically copy and pasted colonial corporate trust blueprints, right? East India Company, this company, Africa Company, right? You probably know more about these corporate companies in other areas colonizing other parts of the world besides North America. I got to ask you this, Travis. In any other colonial system in the world, were the enslaved African class then tricked into putting money into a bank designed just for them to steal their wages and land, or was that something that just happened in North America?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a great question. That's a good line of research I have to look into. Yeah, not that I know of. I mean, yeah, this one was super, super unique. And just the whole thing is God, how these slaves have all this property titles and all this wealth to deposit, and where did all that come from? And then like the Freedmen's Bureau itself, like when you read their notes and their reports, it's like the only guys that knew how to farm were the freed slaves. So I mean, heck, man, you couldn't send them back to Africa. There's no way they could pay the national debt back for that war. So yeah, the whole situation's like, there's the propaganda, and there's the historian propaganda, but then there's like what's really going on the ground and what people are saying. It's like totally, there's just no way. Yeah, I mean, they're like, we need these guys. These guys are the experts.
Come on. We want them to voluntarily leave, but hold on, we can't really survive here without them.
Yeah.
What do we do? And mind you, this is centuries now of them being here, occupying this land. It's not like, Plymouth Rock, they've got a little fort and they're struggling and starving. Like, they've been over here, have a foothold, trade established between different countries, and they still can't survive without us.
Yeah, it's peculiar, right? After the Civil War, it's really overwhelming, and that's also your labor. Your labor is the guys out there, who are actually cutting down all the cedar trees. A lot more, especially in the southeast. I mean, who else? Because one of the things he used to say is the white people can't work in the field. So after the Civil War, white people could get out there in the muck and like, it's kind of weird. Like all of a sudden, what white people are getting out there, and it's like I don't think that's what was going on. I think white people were coming in, but the people doing these type of jobs would have to be people who were comfortable and expert in the land in these type of jobs. Like that's not going to be a villager from England or Germany. I mean,
Yeah.
get my drift? Yeah. So it's even that's hidden history and mislabeled, misidentified.
Oh, definitely, and it's also interesting that in your presentation you mentioned, getting us away from clan or communal societies and more into a nuclear family, and that really echoes the Dawes Commission going to indigenous communities in Indian territory west of the Mississippi and forcing them into individual land allotments. And I think that the reasoning for the nuclear family and the reason for the individual land allotments are the same thing, because if you have a community, then the colonizer has to fight a community. But if you break that community down into isolated little nucleuses, then it's much easier for you and your co-conspirators to individually divide and conquer and pick people off one by one. And man, when we talk about the nuclear family, they got mom and dad as a wage slave trying to do everything they can just to survive in this English colonial system, while the child's being miseducated at an indoctrination center.
Well, yeah, that's one way to put it. I mean, right. I mean, what
Where
was
they teach
school
them some math and some writing and
Well,
some
but
English,
but
but a
but
lot
hey,
of the
no.
history portion is indoctrination,
Well,
right?
okay, so to your point about indoctrination, so what was really behind school integration in the early '70s? Is that so they could take you guys out and make sure you get taught the history they want to be taught, and so that by 1992 you're ready to be called African Americans? It just took 20 years. 20 years later, kind of
Well, let's
interesting
take it
to
a
think
step
about.
further, though. Let's take it a
You
step
know,
further because, the evil European Americans within your community. Okay, you're one of the good ones. You're a-okay, but some of your evil brethren. I mean, they're so intelligent that they find ways to like kill so many birds with one stone. So not only is it a way to
Well,
make us get indoctrinated by their curriculum, but
right,
they
right.
also give us a false sense of progress when we
Yeah.
never wanted desegregation. We wanted separate but equal, but they're like,
Right,
oh no, fuck it, we're gonna give you desegregation. So now our kids are being educated by them. But you know
right.
what's interesting? This echoes post-Civil War Reconstruction era. They brought in so many European migrants and told them, we'll give you land, we'll teach you how to
Mhm.
farm, we'll teach you how to mechanize everything. Just keep these Negroes fearful, terrorize them, lynch them, massacre them, right? That's what you have to do, because we have to break them down so that they are well behind when we go to start this race, right? They,
Right.
they don't have an advantage. They're not starting at the same, starting line. They're way behind, right? Well, in that same vein, desegregation not only makes it so we're being educated by our oppressor in a more direct sense, but when you look at what was going on, especially the little girl who was walking and had to have the National Guard protect her and stuff, did they not also put us into a system of terror where Europeans our ages can act like quasi KKK members and terrorize us and not really have any harsh punishment because they're minors? So the worst they're going to get is suspended or expelled if the faculty ever even does something, right? But I mean, if you look at it from that lens as well, I mean, imagine how not only are you getting miseducated by your oppressor, but you're getting terrorized by your peers. I would imagine that stunts your growth significantly.
Yeah, and it's also another step in it's an idea of breaking the clan structure again, right? So it's like, taking everybody out of their communities and moving. It's just again, just uh continuing that kind of assault on like group and community based sort of thinking about yourself and your place in the world, right? Now they've taken it down to the family, and then they're scattering the families to 17 different schools in the county, right? Every day. Brilliant,
Mm.
right? In the name of like so-called liberal progress, right? And taking this moral high ground through the whole thing. And underneath it all, what's really going on? What's the real agenda? Just like the
And
Freedmen's
is
Bank.
this not
Just
like a
like the Freedmen's
new
Bank.
is this not like a new 3.0 indoctrination center? Because not only are you being indoctrinated through the education or miseducation,
Right.
but it's also like how they talk about a school to prison pipeline. It's also like a weird
Oh,
pre-societal Hunger Game where really little black kid in this white school, your only way to survive is to assimilate. And if you don't assimilate and learn that, regurgitate this curriculum and memorize it down
right,
and get away from your cultural norms and,
right.
cozy up more so with your white peers, then if you don't do that, you flunk, you fail, and now you're a wage slave who can't qualify for higher earning positions because this
Right.
certificate of completion is what allows you to advance to higher education and a higher earning potential. So is this not like a weird new way of forcing a system of conversion in a sense?
I was just kidding. Yeah, you just. Boy, I have nothing to say now. Yeah, it's the latest version of conversion, right? So now we know exactly what the ancestors felt in 1646 or 1620 in New England. Like when you read, especially when you get into like the first, say, 20 or 40 years, there's a lot of this conversion story stuff. And you're like, wow, why would they give it? How could, and then you start realizing because the system was getting
Yeah.
changed bit by bit, or is just for the same reason you just talked about, right?
It used to be
Yeah,
missionaries, it used to be boarding schools, but now our parents have been hostage and converted for generations to where they don't have to separate us from our parent. They still do for most of the day because our parents at work, but we can still
right,
live with our parent because our parents
right.
already been converted.
Yeah, it's really genius. Everybody's on board with the new operating system. That's
Mhm.
why I like to look at descriptions of the pre-colonial civilization, the economics, and how things looked, and because that's the only way to see like what the contrast is besides just like skin color, right? It's like there's all these differences. This is a real 180 approach to doing things, yeah, and you're seeing it here still go on today, right? And they know it's like, yeah, I got to keep cracking at them in each generation, like in different ways, like to keep it all, I think, like scattered. Yeah, it's right. It's tricky
Mhm.
stuff.
Oh,
It's
it gets deep.
tricky. I mean,
And you know what? On my website, nativeblack.ancestry.com, I've built out a digital archive with a bunch of resources, newspaper clippings, book excerpts, all that good stuff. And something comes to mind. Yeah, here we go. Page 12. And we're going to get page 13. Perfect. Check this out. This is going to blow you guys' mind. We're talking about how school is the new conversion center, right? How it morphed from, missionaries and Spanish missions and boarding schools to, desegregated public schools, right? Well, check this out. This was such a memorable find. It took me like a lot of money and several hours consistently searching through newspaper archives, but I found it and I'm going to share it with you all. Check this out. So, this newspaper article is titled, let me show you the right page with the title. It's titled, When is an Indian Not an Indian? It's When He's a Negro. This was published February 22nd, 1970. And I believe it's a Providence Sunday Journal from a newspaper called the Rhode Islander or
yeah, that's a
something like
fun.
that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Now check this out.
1979, man.
1979. Now they're gonna talk about the story of Denise D- Dowdell. This is her right here. This is a niece rocking what they call an afro, Some
Yeah,
would call
frog.
this a black girl, but let's see what Denise has for us. Check this out, y'all. This is going to blow your mind. We're talking about how schools are a conversion center. We're talking about
This
how
is great.
desegregation was really a way to have
I
you
think so.
indoctrinated and infiltrated, right? And help me out.
Yeah.
Desegregation, this article is 1976 or something. When did desegregation
To
happen
begin,
exactly?
yeah. So there, so because in my community, this was talked about a lot.
Mhm.
It's like I think it's 1972. It's like it's like
Wow.
a
So this is a
supreme,
few short
and it's
years.
and it's a Supreme Court decision, and so then it always got resistance to it by whites was always framed in terms of resistance to those liberal judges overreaching on behalf of those blacks again. Type so
Mhm.
the whole psychological war on both audiences is so flipping everything. The whole thing. You guys think it's good for you, and then the white guys thinking, yeah. You see what I'm
Eh,
saying? Yeah,
well,
it's
guys, again,
diabolical.
let's break this all the way down. This right here is Denise, Denise Dodell, right?
Oh, look at that outfit, the turtleneck, man.
This is Denise. The title of the article is When is an Indian not an Indian? It's when he's a Negro. And let's get to doing some reading here, guys. Check this out.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, that's good.
Check this out. Denise Dodell is an attractive 18-year-old South Kingstown girl with an afro haircut now studying at an upstate New York university. I always believed people are people, Denise said on a weekend home from college. That whole brotherhood thing. But now I don't believe that way anymore. In high school, a couple of teachers could mold me and make me what they wanted me to be. If I went back to South Kingston High School now, nobody could mold me. When I was growing up, I always said I was an Indian. My grandfather was a sachem and all that. No, I wouldn't say I was an Indian now. My mother and aunts are always talking about the land that was taken away from the Narragansett Indians. They'll never forget about that land. I mean, every time they'd get to talking down at Charleston at the Indian church, they'd always bring up that land, but they wouldn't do anything about it. People in this town tell their kids, get married and settle down and get a steady job. That's all you need to worry about. The black families are really conservative. When I used to play my soul records, the other girls would come to the house and say, you playing that jazz stuff? Their mothers wouldn't even let them wear slacks. They told them the thing to do was to find a husband and settle down. There's hardly anybody black in this town who has made it out. Even the kids I knew who could have made it out have nearly all dropped back. In South Kingstown, there's a line that you know you can't go past, but it's never said in so many words. I don't remember any slurs when I was growing up. Oh, maybe one or two. Sometimes we would kid around with each other and say yes, and call each other a black N word, hard R included. They was playing rough back then, okay? They was jonesing. The black brothers and sisters at the university are very together and they test me. If a brother sees me with my white roommate, he'll come up to us and ask her for a kiss. And I mean blacks from Chicago, street gang types. They said I was too white when I arrived at college. Not my color, but the way I thought. I don't think I even have to talk about race to whites anymore. On the bus coming home to Rhode Island this weekend, a white girl sat next to me and said, well, where is it all going to end between the races? Well, I don't know where it's going to end. I'm not interested in all that. I'm just going to make it as a black. So again, when we talk about school indoctrination and conversion, and she said, what again? She always knew she was an Indian. She descends from Narragansett Indians. Grandfather was a sachem and all that. But now she's just going to go it as a black. Why? Because of that education. Let's talk about it. Chris Jacobs says, that's my favorite new article so far. Our women are so fine. Yeah, no, it was a lot of hard work to find that article. But you guys can check this out and much, much more over at the website nativeblackancestry.com. With that said, we're going to cut to a ever brief commercial break. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Hi, my name is Frances Tuck, And I contacted Mike from Mike TV on YouTube because I wanted to find out about my family's Native American history that I believed existed. Through the research that I was able to do through Mike TV, I was able to find out that our name is indeed on the registry. I had a consultation with Mike today, and because of his advice and the research that he has done, I am now confident that I'm able to find my family's roots in the Native American History database. Thank you, Mike.
Let's talk about it. Real people, real results. Make sure to check out nativeblackancestry.com. Yeah, Travis, what do you think about that article?
So early on, it's when she, I don't know if she said it or it was just described in the article. You know, got to go get go get a job, right? You got to focus on that, right? And then it looks like to me too. I didn't realize the amount, perhaps, of like I'd almost say repression in a sense. Like, so don't listen to jazz, or at least don't let the white people, I guess, see you listening to it. Don't saying that nobody's even made out. I'm like, wow. So they're so trying so hard to jump through all these high bars that are being created by these, these white Protestants and all the, you know what I mean? You can see, almost like the like it's happening. They're similar. It's all in the name of pragmatism. It's all pragmatic at the time. In every generation. It's pragmatic.
Yeah, and this article is a true gem. This is one of the best finds I've ever come across. Well, watch. This is a whole separate part of it. Watch. This is a different story by Jacqueline Campbell. Check this out. It says it should be a warm, happy, all-American kind of story. This peaceful commingling of the races, but there are elements of tragedy too. The trouble with history is you have to go way back and start at the beginning, and right there you lose people. Who cares what happened in 1669? That's funny because we're talking about a treaty and about the time period.
Yeah, it's really important.
We care. Very important. We care. Everybody watching cares. We care.
You ought to care.
Okay. How about an American story in red, white, and black? The story of three races now in southern Rhode Island town. Maybe you can call it way down up the Sagantucket. Right now in South Kingstown, there are somewhere around 752 non-whites. That's according to the 1965 census. It figures out to 5.2% of the town's population, and only 2 Rhode Island cities have a higher percentage, Providence and Newport. There is no category for American Indian in that census.
Right. I mean, but also like the Negro includes persons of Indian. You got to like this. The Negro includes persons of Indian and Negro descent. That's like the next sentence. So that's like circular logic. He's like, so you're a Negro if you're a Negro descent. Like, what is the Negro is not? It's just
there's no category for American Indian in the census. What's the American Indian being classified as? Not as white. I'll tell you that.
Right, and they don't use the word African. So I see this all the time in the books I read. Well, they'll use the word Negro like in illogical ways, like incoherent ways, and it's like they're trying to do anything but call them an Indian, basically. Yeah. But they don't want it. But they're not going to call them an African either because they don't want to lie. It's kind of interesting what they want to walk that line. But yeah, even
Negro
right here, right?
comes from the Spanish term black, and it literally never meant African. The Spanish called us negros de terras, blacks of this land. They would call the Africans negros de Guinea, blacks of Africa. But you see how now they try to morph it into like Negro somehow has to.
Oh yeah, that's all part of the plan, right? They're coming up with this stuff in the 1500s, like they're learning and they're going, okay, here's what we're gonna do, because you see this stuff in the writing, like you see the appearance of Negro all of a sudden a lot, like in the 1600s, and then you start to see black in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and that kind of, then they start bringing Negro back into it really more after the Civil War. That's actually Negro and, the inward, right? They're working it back in again, actually.
Check this out, Travis. Again, there's no category for American.
Yeah, not amazing. Right. So guys, think about it, right? But that's isn't that clever? It's like another clever move. Well, we just don't have room on the paper for that category. Sorry. Like, what are you gonna do about it, right? Like, you gotta think back.
Hold on. It gets deeper though. It gets deeper. In
Oh, yeah.
1960, when each person counted could check off his race
Self-identifying.
himself,
Right.
there were 932 self-identified
Writing it
American
in.
Indians in Rhode Island.
Yeah,
The
that's
Census Bureau
amazing.
explains, listen, the Census Bureau explained then that Negro includes persons of Indian and Negro descent, unless the Indian ancestry very definitively predominates or unless the individual is regarded as an Indian in the community.
I mean,
so you have to be
again,
accepted as an Indian by your white settler colonizer peers in order for you to, or you just have to obviously look like a cliche tonto. Like,
right. And this is just unbelievable that, you know, again, they don't ever define Negro really.
Yeah.
It's just a word they can use against you at will.
Hey, in the South Kingstown community, there's at least one time that race is recorded. At the town hall, the final count of births doesn't name race. We just put a star beside some names, says a town clerical worker, meaning presumably those who are non-white.
Right.
But the clerk adds, the official records that go to the State Department of Health list race. Look at the psyops. Like on some Jewish star type shit. If you're a baby of color, they're going to put a star next to your name. But the hospital doesn't assign race. But somehow between the paper with the star and the document getting to the Department of Health, the Department of Health is going to assign you a race based on that star.
Yeah.
Damn.
I mean,
hold on. Ooh, it gets even worse, and it ain't never going to get better. A count of those records for 1969 turns up 11 Negro births, 4 American Indians, and 2 with 1 Negro and 1 American Indian parents, which really means both American Indian parents. One just got classified,
right,
and one
highly
is
likely.
recognized.
Right.
Yeah, at least 4 of those non-white names: Noka, Perry, Hazard, and Robinson. And it's funny how these are non-white names, but nowadays,
so awesome.
if we said Perry or Robinson, people
Yes.
wouldn't think these are non-white names, right?
Right.
So a lot of you guys, now you understand why on my website I built a tribal surname tab, because a lot of us don't realize our surnames come from indigenous people who were converted and, you know, assimilated. Yeah. Like, non-white names are Hazard, Perry, Robertson, and Noka. I mean, come on. These appear among Indian names in the town census of 1774, which could make one curious about that triracial history in that little town. The only trouble with these birth records is that it is sometimes up to the attending physician or nurse to fill in the race. It's difficult to know whether they have asked the new parents or simply put down the race from the observation. And guys, they put it down from the observation. Check this out. My son is so fair-skinned. If we was back in the Reconstruction era, he'd be white passing, okay? That's how high yellow my little boy is. But guess what? Because I was present in the hospital room when my son was born, and they saw me, and when they saw me, they saw a Negro, they saw a black, they saw a colored man, that nurse put on my son's birth certificate, black. Whole time I'm an American Indian. And then we had to file the paperwork to have it changed and have my son recognized as an American Indian, because they didn't ask if we were a part of a tribe. They didn't ask me what my ethnicity is or nationalities. They just went by lookership. And it ended up on an official document. Damn, right? So if we keep reading here, it's difficult to know whether they have asked the new parents or simply put down the race from observation. An ad in the New York Times last spring, placed by the Rhode Island Development Council, wooed tourists to the state with the promise of a unique Afro-Indian lore awaiting them in South County. They done turned our community into tourism. There's these black Indians down here in this county. They're like Indians, but they're black. They're like Negro Indians. They are Niggians. Come down, boys. Come down. Come look. We've got some Niggians down here. We've never seen types like these.
Yep.
that neatly labels South County non-whites, but maybe they would prefer Indo-Africans. No, we would not prefer Indo-Africans. Look at this. We did not want to be
Yeah.
called no Indo-Africans. Or maybe they don't care for labels at all.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. And guys, we do have to wrap up this broadcast sooner than later and get on to the next. But this is the final thing I'm going to leave you with, Travis. This is how much of a gem, how much of a rare find this was. Here's another separate piece of the article. But hey, your people be snitching on yourselves, okay? Because you don't know it's snitching because it was legalized. It was fine in the eyes of the Lord, in the eyes of the law. But to y'all were saying some incriminating things. Check this out. Who is an Indian? When the United States government counts heads, it says we are whatever we say we are. A census taker now working in South Kingstown in preparation for the 1970 census said recently, quote, if they tell me they are Indian and they look Negro, I put down what they say and change it later. Aren't Indians supposed to have high cheekbones?
Man, yeah. So it just shows you who they're really after with all these years, right? This a certain look of Indian, right? And you totally, I mean, even in that article, the assumption was that these names were Afro. It's like they don't realize that all these Indians were being converted, and this is what they look like. It's not that they then met Africans 2 generations later. And see, they're always assume. You see, and of course, if you believe the conventional slave narrative, you actually can believe all that. But once you know those numbers and all that, you realize, no. There's a group of people that look like that already here, and they're getting converted over all these years. So, that's
Or
the
they're
story of
in
Aunt Jemima,
neighboring
right?
colonies in Central America or South America or the Caribbean, and they're being
Right.
trafficked to different parts of the Americas, right? But
Right.
no, dark skin. They must have been
Yeah.
from Africa somewhere down the road.
Right. So this could be like ultimately like again it plays into this thing, the southeastern American Indian in particular was
Yes.
of a highly hated Indian of them all, like whatever's going on here to the pound of the Civil War. All right, like so it's like wow, that's that's the one they always want to call a Negro.
Well, here's why. Let me bridge the gap a little bit. Out of all the communities that are dealing with colonization and conversion, the ones that put up the biggest fight were the southeastern tribes.
I totally agree with that, and I agree that's why the punishment is so harsh after Reconstruction.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
We've been giving you 300, we've given you 400 years to get on with the program.
Mhm.
That's what's going on in the head of those
The ones
guys.
on the East Coast, tribes in the Great Lakes region, they assimilated, they did trade. Some of it was pressured, some of it was
Yep.
forced, but they got
Right,
got along to get along. We did
right,
not yield. We did
right.
not
I'm
break.
telling you,
We're
yes,
enslaved in place. We're
right,
taken as prisoners of war,
right.
reclassified, and still rebel, still
Right,
revolt, still
and this
rebel.
explains the KKK after the Civil War. This explains prohibition targeting these counties that are deeply Black Americans. Currency, making money off of liquor, all of that. Like they're always continuing to go after this group of people, drying the swamps and the wetlands in Florida and Georgia, Okefenokee Swamp. Who's that impacting? What group of people? So you can see like the continuation of the war. It's like a soft power war or something. I don't know how you want to phrase it, but once you realize who these people are, it's like and they're treating them differently, even than other indigenous Indians. There's just something in particular about like the Mississippian, I guess
They remember things like the Fort
Virginia
Mims
Southward, I guess.
massacre, where
Something, right.
Creek
So what?
Indians destroyed their whole settlement and
Well,
took them out.
right.
The
So
Yamasee War, etc. Right?
yeah, so there it is. It is what it is. But it's definitely extra, right? And tie that to the Hebrew and all that, and like the
Mhm.
ancient origins. It just who, they were planning this for a long time.
Oh yeah, most of it. And guys, with that, we got to wrap up this broadcast, but don't go anywhere. As soon as this broadcast ends, it's going to push you into the next one. We've got one more live stream queued up for you today, And we're going to get into some history about Aunt Jemima, believe it or not. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.